Um, the patient was a 55-year-old male with a history of fever of 14 days, right upper abdominal pain 10 days, and yellowish discoloration of eyes for the past 10 days. He was being evaluated at a local hospital, and a ultrasound abdomen revealed a large liver space occupying lesion, and he was referred to our gastroenterology department. On detailed history taking, fever was high-grade intermittent type, not associated with chills and rigor. Abdominal pain was acute in onset, right-sided, upper abdominal, mostly continuous dull aching in nature, with no radiation, shifting or referral of pain. He had non-progressive jaundice with no history of clay-colored stools, pruritus or abdominal distension, and it was associated with loss of appetite, nausea and malaise. However, there was no history of loss of weight, hematemesis or melena. There was no history of similar illness in the past, and he was recently diagnosed with hypertension while he was being evaluated. There was no history of tuberculosis or any other chronic illnesses, comorbidities, and no history of smoking, tobacco consumption or alcohol consumption. On examination, patient was general physical examination revealed icterus. However, there was no generalized lymphadenopathy or pedal edema. His vitals were normal except for a slightly elevated blood pressure, and the patient was obese with a BMI of 29.6. The rest of the general examination did not reveal any stigmata of jaundice in the form of spider nevi, Palmer erythema, and no neurocutaneous markers suggestive of Cushing syndrome. So, on per-abdominal examination, there was hepatomegaly with the liver, which was palpable about 5 centimeters below the right subcostal margin, and the liver span was 17 centimeters. However, no other masses or free fluid were present. So, biochemical investigations were done, and apart from elevated total leukocyte count, patient has had deranged liver function test, which revealed elevated total bilirubin, and the direct-indirect bilirubin ratio was more or less the same. The transaminases and the alkaline phosphatase were also elevated. So, with this picture, working diagnosis of acute viral hepatitis was made, and he was being managed on similar lines with conservative and supportive care. And within 2 weeks, the patient's liver function also improved. While the patient was being managed, further imaging was done in view of the ultrasound which he was carrying, which showed a large liver SOL. Another ultrasound was showing a 14 into 13 centimeter large, well-defined complex cystic mass lesion with internal echoes and septations arising from the right lobe of liver, suggestive of a hydatid cyst. So, at our hospital, cross-sectional imaging was asked for in order to further characterize the lesion. A CECT abdomen was done, which showed a large mass. This is a mass in the retroperitoneal region, and which measured about 17 into 15 centimeters. It's a heterogeneously enhancing lesion with mostly areas of non-enhancement suggestive of necrosis, and a thin rim of peripheral enhancement in the margins of the lesion. There was no clear suggestion of infiltration into surrounding structures. However, it was closely abutting the inferior surface of liver, inferior vena cava, and the right kidney was pushed down. So, a final impression of a large lesion arising from the right adrenal gland, abutting the pole of right kidney with no clear planes was no clear plane from the right lobe of liver was made. In view of this mass, more likely to be arising from the adrenal, as the adrenal was not visualized separately, working diagnosis of an adrenal tumor and a high suspicion of adrenocortical carcinoma was kept in mind, and the history was revisited. There was no history suggestive of hypercatecholaminemia or hypercortisolism. So, with the working diagnosis of a right adrenal tumor, a hormonal evaluation was also done, which revealed a suppressible overnight dexamethasone suppression test. So the HP axis was intact, and the urinary metanephrines and normetanephrines were also within the normal range. And serum dihydroepiandrosterone, which is a tumor marker which is suggestive of adrenocortical cancers, was also normal. However, the index of suspicion was high, and we proceeded with surgery in view of the large size of the tumor and the CT picture. So open adrenalectomy with a thoracoabdominal approach was done. Intraoperatively, there was no ascites, no peritoneal or mesenteric nodules or lymphadenopathy. Liver was enlarged. There were few nodular lesions in both lobes of the liver, and intraop ultrasound was done by a radiologist, which was suggestive of hemangiomas and benign looking lesions. There was a large tumor arising from the right adrenal gland with multiple parasitic vessels, and there was no invasion or adhesions into the surrounding structure. However, the tumor was abutting the IVC and the right kidney. However, planes could be dissected easily. Grossly, the tumor was well encapsulated, measuring 20 by 18 by 16 centimeters, and weighed almost about 2 kilograms. On cut section, the mass was heterogeneous with solid cystic areas and a large area of hemorrhage and necrosis in the center of the lesion, and there were few pale areas in between. Post-operatively, the patient did well and recovered smoothly and was discharged on the 6th post-operative day on full oral diet. The final histopathology showed tumor with vague fascicles and benign spindle cells displaying oval to elongated nuclei, dispersed chromatin, and moderate lymphoplasmacytic inflammatory infiltrate, and with inconspicuous mitosis. And a part of the normal adrenal gland was identified in the periphery of the tumor. The final impression was an inflammatory pseudotumor of the adrenal, suggestive of an inflammatory myofibroblastic tumor. This is the tumor cells, which is mainly fascicles and spindle-shaped cells arranged in fascicles, and this is the part of the normal adrenal which was found at the periphery of the tumor. In view of this rare histology, and immunohistochemistry was also done for the tumor, and the spindle cells were positive for Desmin, anaplastic lymphoma kinase 1, and focal positive for smooth muscle actin. They were negative for CD34, which is basically a marker for lymphoma and B cells, and Ki67, which is a marker of proliferation, was also low. So this is positivity for Desmin, for anaplastic lymphoma kinase 1, and focal positivity for smooth muscle actin. Post-operatively, the patient is now 14 months post-surgery and is doing well, and there is no local regional recurrence on imaging. There are no questions. I will proceed with the review of literature. So, inflammatory pseudotumor or myofibroblastic tumor is a tumor which has many names, and we know that any entity with many names is probably because a lot of people have tried to define it, and there is no conclusion amongst the experts. So, many people have called it as plasma cell granulomas, inflammatory myofibroblastic tumor, myofibrohistiocytic proliferation, histiocytomas, xanthomas, fibroxanthomas, xanthogranulomas, xanthomatous pseudotumor, and plasma cell histiocytomas, solitary mast cell granulomas, and inflammatory fibrosarcomas. These names are basically on whichever site they were identified in. So as we can extrapolate, the exact cause is unknown, and the confusion in nomenclature is also a result of the ambiguity in determining the process of origin of this tumor. There are two theories that have been proposed: a post-inflammatory reactive process and true neoplasms. The proponents of post-inflammatory theory say so because of the occurrence post-surgery, trauma, and VP shunts, and various organisms have also been implicated in pathological specimens that have been studied. Organisms like Mycoplasma and Nocardia are seen in lung pseudotumors, Actinomyces in liver, Epstein-Barr virus in splenic and nodal tumors, and Mycobacteria in spindle cell tumors. Inflammatory mediators like interleukin-1 have also been identified, and these contribute to the local and systemic effects like fever and pain. The proponents of neoplastic theory say that these tumors have a potential for local recurrence and distant metastasis, which might occur even after years of diagnosis and the primary treatment. Hence, they say that this is neoplasm. And the most definitive evidence in recent times has been because of the advent of immunohistochemistry and genetic mapping. And clonal alterations have been seen involving the anaplastic lymphoma kinase gene, which is located on chromosome 2. And this is seen in a significant subset of these cases. Some are associated with IgG4 related sclerosing disease, where there is extensive positivity for IgG4 plasma cells and T cells. The manifestations of such tumors with IgG4 positivity present as autoimmune pancreatitis, sclerosing cholangitis, cholecystitis, sialadenitis, retroperitoneal fibrosis, tubulointestinal nephritis, and interstitial pneumonia, prostatitis, inflammatory pseudotumors, and lymph nodes. The differential diagnosis is lymphoma. However, inflammatory pseudotumors have both T and B cells, in contradistinction to lymphomas, which are clonal proliferation of either one of the cell lines. So these tumors were first named as inflammatory pseudotumors in 1954 by Umiker and Iverson because the clinical and imaging findings mimic those of malignant tumors. However, the terminology was finally concluded to be inflammatory myofibroblastic tumors, which was the broad term for all these lesions, which was introduced in 1986. This is an uncommon spindle cell proliferation that may involve any site within the body, the abdomen, lungs, orbit, gastrointestinal tract, and genitourinary tract being the most commonly reported. Usually they are seen in children and young adults, and with the advent of immunohistochemistry, we have more awareness and more knowledge about these tumors. IMTs arising from the adrenal gland, however, are exceptional, and there are only 5 reported cases in the literature. So the first case was reported in 2006, and our case was reported in 2016, which is the 5th case. Most of the patients are in the 3rd to 5th decade, except for the first case, which was reported in a preschool child. And most of the patients present with either upper abdominal pain or a flank pain, and some patients are asymptomatic. As we can see in all the cases, the tumor size has been fairly large, and the smallest reported size is 7 centimeters. And there is all patients have undergone surgery, and there is no reported recurrence in adrenal inflammatory tumors as far as the literature is concerned. So clinically, these tumors may be asymptomatic, and however 10 to 20% of patients will present with pyrexia and weight loss. The tumor size at diagnosis is most often in the range of 5 to 10 centimeters, and their biological behavior is indeterminate. The differentials include adrenocortical tumors, pheochromocytoma, adrenal metastasis, and tuberculosis. The imaging features are non-specific, and preoperative differentiation from other adrenal masses is very difficult. Hence, complete surgical resection is mandatory because malignancy can never be excluded preoperatively. On imaging as well, these tumors are variable and non-specific, and there is no characteristic pattern or identification of these tumors. They can, on ultrasound, they can be hypoechoic or hyperechoic with ill-defined or well-circumscribed borders, and they have increased vascularity on color Doppler. On CT scan as well, there is a variable appearance. They can have a low, equal or high attenuation as compared to the surrounding structures. Calcification might be seen, which is more common in children, and most often they are solid masses with heterogeneous enhancement, which is not very pronounced. And sometimes the enhancement might be just a peripheral enhancement with a delayed central filling, and sometimes no enhancement at all. Larger lesions are shown to have central necrosis. On MRI also, there is low signal intensity on both T1 and T2 weighted images, which is suggestive of the fibrotic nature of these tumors. And delayed imaging in MRI as well might show increasing enhancement. On PET scans, these tumors light up. However, the specificity is low. It is difficult to distinguish them from other tumors or inflammatory conditions, which might also be added on PET scan. So these are all the commonly seen locations where these tumors occur, and adrenal is on the bottom of the list. So coming to the treatment, complete surgical resection, as I emphasized previously, is the treatment of choice, with the exception of orbital regions where for functional purposes the debulking might be the only option possible. And surgical resection is most often successful in all cases. Even the cases who have local recurrence, the growth can be resected. With radical excision, the risk of relapse is low, but relapse and distant metastasis has been reported in other sites even many years after treatment. There is no role of radiation or chemotherapy for adrenal inflammatory myofibroblastic tumors. However, radiation and corticosteroid use has been reported in lung tumors which are inoperable, and there is no proven survival benefit when compared to surgery. On microscopy, they are basically plum tumor cells which are spindle shaped, or myofibroblasts or histiocytes which are arranged haphazardly in fascicles, accompanied by thick collagen and prominent inflammatory infiltrate, particularly plasma cells, which distinguishes them from fibromatosis and fasciitis, which mostly has lymphocytes and neutrophils. The immunohistochemistry, usually they express actin, desmin and keratin, and anaplastic lymphoma kinase 1 positivity. This is mainly seen in 30 to 40% of patients, especially in the pediatric age group. And IMTs that have metastasized are most often ALK negative. So ALK positivity is a good prognostic factor. And there is a reported case of metastatic inflammatory myofibroblastic tumor of the liver with ALK gene rearrangement positive, and this patient responded dramatically to an ALK inhibitor. So this is a therapeutic breakthrough for patients who have ALK gene rearrangements positive. There is no reported recurrence for adrenal tumors as far as adrenal tumors are concerned, and other sites there is a risk of recurrence of almost 10 to 25%, and less than 5% of cases metastasize. The behavior is difficult to predict on morphological grounds, and some even regard these tumors as low-grade sarcomas, and sarcomatous degeneration has been reported. Hence, surveillance is crucial. So I would like to conclude by saying that inflammatory myofibroblastic tumors are rare tumors, especially when it comes to the adrenal gland. They are radiologically and clinically, we are unable to distinguish them from malignancy, and they must be considered in the differential diagnosis of suspicious adrenal masses. Complete surgical resection is hence mandatory, as malignancy cannot be excluded, and recurrence and metastasis is unknown. So in view of the metastatic potential of these tumors at other sites, careful post-operative follow-up and repeat imaging at 6 months is advisable. Thank you.